On February 9th, 2025, the Kansas City Chiefs faced off against the Philadelphia Eagles in the biggest football event of the year. The game, which was the 59th in a tradition... Okay, look, I can't worm my way around it. The name of the game is copyrighted and strictly enforced, so I'm just going to err on the side of caution. Anyway, the game had many highlights. That is, unless you were a Chiefs fan. As with every year, however, a lot of media attention and chatter surrounded the commercials. Commercials to the event have been a staple of annual discussion for decades. Even those who don't watch the game are often interested in the ads that come out of 3 hours of men pounding each other. This year was no different. But one commercial drew particular attention. OpenAI, the company that is currently leading the charge of AI hype, spent $14 million on their commercial. It's important to note a couple things before we go any further. OpenAI is in deep trouble right now, especially before the super thing. See, almost 2 weeks before this commercial aired, a Chinese AI company named DeepSeek completely upended the stock market. Their model, which was largely open sourced, scored higher than OpenAI's ChatGPT model and, according to them, cost only $6 million to produce. Almost $1 trillion in stock evaluation was lost as a result. OpenAI and other AI companies were sent scrambling. See, China had been specifically targeted with trade restrictions to keep their tech sector from accessing the most efficient chips. Now, don't get me wrong, there's more to this story. Okay, it's fairly unlikely that the full cost of DeepSeek's model was only $6 million, taking into account startup costs, models used before developing the new one, whatever reporting measures were used, means it's a conservative estimate. But it's the best one we have, so while you should take it with a grain of salt, you also shouldn't assume it's a wholesale lie. Regardless of this, the fact that DeepSeek's AI model was made to be run locally on someone's computer, performed better than OpenAI's models, was made with inferior technology and cost far, far less, shattered a lot of expectations. At time of recording, OpenAI has raised nearly $20 billion in funding. What have they been doing with that money? That's besides the, let's be charitable and say public image issues that generative AI as a whole has been struggling with. So this company, in the middle of a massive crisis, released a spot specifically crafted to present an attractive and confident image. And fun fact, if you believe the figures, the ad costs approximately $14 million to make, or 2.3 times what it cost DeepSeek to make an AI model that nearly crashed the stock market. This is ridiculous, right? Well, not if you're a journalist. Since I'm not a sports guy and Kendrick hadn't started his halftime show, I learned about this ad from this article by Kylie Robeson at The Verge, inside OpenAI's $14 million Super Bowl debut. Robeson interviewed OpenAI's CMO Kate Rauch and no one else. We want the message to feel relevant to the audience that is watching the Super Bowl, which includes tens of millions of people who have no familiarity with AI. Most of the article functions as a platform for Rauch to spout corporate platitudes. The article reveals exactly one interesting thing, other than the ridiculous price tag. OpenAI has a text-to-video program called AI Sora. So, did OpenAI make the ad with the company did not use their own product to make the ad? Addressing the wider AI context of the ad being placed, The Verge felt it crucial to mention that Google's recent ad was pulled after people hated it. No mention of DeepSeek. Merely that it comes at a time where, quote, the stakes couldn't be higher for OpenAI's moment. And of course, that the ad, quote, debuts amid growing public discourse about AI's societal impact. This is an article that functionally serves as an ad. It's about an ad from a multi-billion-dollar company with a single interview speaking with chief marketing officer of that company. The most pushback given is uncertainty. Fox Media, the parent company of The Verge, signed a deal with OpenAI to train their models on the work of their news companies. Okay, so cards on the table. If you're here on YouTube watching this video You are most likely distrustful of news media in some way or another. In the Reuters Institute's digital news report for the last year, they found that while it remains stable from the year before, only 40% of respondents trusted the news. Almost the same amount of people said that they intentionally avoided the news. At the same time, 31% of people got their news from YouTube. Now, I don't really want to hone in on your specific gripes with news media. Some are far more warranted than others, but it's an undeniable problem. Importantly, I don't mean to single out Robeson or The Verge as singularly awful with this opening anecdote. In fact, the only reason that I learned that the OpenAI ad didn't use their own product was because of this reporting. The Verge has also not been quiet about the deal that Vox Media made with OpenAI.
We do a lot of disclosures on this show. We want to be really transparent about where information comes from, reasons to not trust us if you don't want to trust us. My goal is always to just empower the audience with information. That's why we do disclosures. That's why they're a joke. I want the only currency we have as a news organization is trust. Our newsroom has to not think about it. That's actually what independence is not, I know that our company has a deal or an investor, and I'm just going to I'm going to think about it as I write the story. The goal is they don't think about it at all.
Right.
And we just go do the reporting and we publish what is true or what we believe or what we think people should know, right?
But I use this particular example because it's outside of what you typically see as news media that's scrutinized. The New York Times, the Washington Post, Fox News, Sinclair Broadcasting, these outlets all get the manufacturing consent treatment. And with good reason. Jeff Bezos, billionaire who made his riches off of Amazon, owns the Post. Fox News and Sinclair Broadcasting are run by ideological conservatives hoping to steer politics to the right. The New York Times is, well, it's a lot of things, but I'll just zero in on the fact that it's been a real transphobic pile of garbage. All of these outlets are also downplaying the Trump and Musk regime's unconstitutional coup of government agencies that is currently going on. But The Verge is different. It's one of the larger tech reporting publications, yes, but it's owned by Vox Media, a substantially smaller enterprise than any of these other outlets. Again, I want to be clear, this is not your license to blacklist The Verge. I don't. I regularly use them as a reliable news source. But, like every single news outlet, they have a bias. They are influenced by their material conditions and the resulting social expectations. This is something that's easy to forget, but I remember the first time their ideological slant became pretty frustrating. Let's go back in March of 2024, after the US House of Representatives passed a bill requiring TikTok to be sold before January 19th, 2025, or be barred from app stores. Here's what editor-in-chief for The Verge, Nilay Patel, said in The Vergecast, discussing why he believes that the ban is justified.
The thing that I'm saying, based on no evidence, is you should not let an adversary of the United States even have this capability. No one wants to take the chance. Our government believes the security of the United States is threatened by the existence of TikTok in some way.
Our government says that.
It believes it. The 50-0 vote, I think, just really, there's something about that. They saw the evidence, they walked out. They all did the same thing at the same time.
I do agree that that is the single most compelling piece of
I've just got it circled in my brain. Whatever happened there is a big deal. I don't know what it is, and that is the problem.
Now, I don't think time has made this take worse. I think it was a terrible take at the time. I can't find exactly who was on the House committee, but let's break it down. The average age of House Democrats was 58, and the average age of House Republicans was 57. Both of these parties were invited to a closed meeting with the express purpose that China, a geopolitical rival, is spying on them with technology that's popular with young people. So they're agreeing that China is bad? Okay. Now we know that high-ranking members of that committee are publicly saying that they moved forward on the ban because of pro-Palestinian content on the platform. This was pretty transparent at the time as well. Since I feel I have to qualify this, I don't know what evidence was presented to the committee to sway their vote. It hasn't been made public. But to suggest that Congress members of these parties are completely irrational beings that believe credible evidence in spite of all these factors, it's hilarious? I'm going to move on from The Verge, I promise. It's just that I think tech reporting is some of the most crucial right now and, at the same time, some of the most emblematic of the issue with journalism as a whole. Let's take it back a bit. If you're even slightly into news media criticism, you're most likely aware of Manufacturing Consent by Edward S. Herman and Noam Chomsky and their propaganda model. You know, the 5 filters that reporting must pass through before it's published in a news outlet. Ownership, advertising, sourcing, FLAC, and anti-communism. This is still useful, and I encourage you to read the book to learn more. But for now, I just want to take the ownership aspect of this model. In the words of Michael Parenti, a political scientist, professor, and author of Inventing Reality, The Politics of News Media,
the major form of news control can be found in the structure of the news organizations themselves. The people who inhabit these boards of directors are overwhelmingly drawn from the major corporations and banks in America. So the influence of these major corporations in the economy, the multi-billion-dollar businesses, extends also to the influence they exercise directly in the media. Are you telling me that I'm not my own man? I'll have you know that in 17 years with this paper, I always say what I like. And I say to them, you say what you like because they like what you say. I mean, you don't know you're wearing a leash if you sit by the peg all day. It's only if you then begin to wander to a prohibited parameter that you feel the tug, you see.
As Nilay Patel said when commenting on Vox Media's deal with OpenAI,
The goal is they don't think about it at all.
Right.
And we just go do the reporting and we publish what is true.
the nature of bias and influence being invisible, often as a product of how the newsroom is structured, makes it difficult to actually grasp. So it's important to put yourself directly in the shoes of a reporter who may not be cognitively aware of this framework. Imagine that this is your job. You have to write between 1 to 3 stories a day, a quota that's fairly standard range in the industry. Most stories require at least 2 sources, but the more the better. You have to cold call experts, reach out to the original sources for comment, deal with editor questions, toss out what they ask you to toss out, and refine what they ask you to refine, provide wider context, and have a general knowledge of everything that you're reporting on. For example, if a study is published that has a wild claim, that will probably be newsworthy. What if every expert who could debunk the story for you just didn't answer their phone? What if the only person who regularly speaks to a journalist receives funding from an interested party? What if you don't know that? Would they provide you the comment? Now imagine doing this day in, day out for your career. Add on to that, politicians who are blaming you for problems. Your colleagues are getting laid off left and right. Your wages aren't increasing with productivity, and whoever owns your company doesn't approve pitches that delve into problems with other businesses they're involved with, or any interests that they may have. Speaking on ownership, let's stay in the tech realm. There's an obvious difference between an outlet like 404 Media, owned and operated by its 4 founders and focused on, in the words of their announcement, local reporting from the internet, and, say, Bloomberg, which is not strictly a tech outlet, but heavily focuses on that area of reporting, because it's a huge pillar of their business reporting. So each outlet, though heavily focused on technology, is going to report on tech companies in a very different way. Similarly, reporting for a company like Bloomberg, which is far bigger, is going to be more focused on more growth and more news content than 404 Media. They're smaller and are largely funded directly by their audience, other than Bloomberg, which makes money from subscriptions, ads, their business selling terminals to the stock market aficionados. That's most of it. Manufacturing consent is good, but it doesn't address the full scope of journalism in the modern landscape. It's not 1988 anymore. So I want to focus on an aspect of reporting that often goes under the radar in this examination. At the time when Inventing Reality and Manufacturing Consent were written, journalism, as an industry, was still dominated by large outlets. There were smaller, less circulated publications, The Nation, The New Republic, to name a couple, but the 24-hour news cycle had begun its full swing and the consolidation of media was reaping massive profits. Since the advent of the internet, of course, this has changed drastically. It's become a sad inside joke that, on the business side of things, these news media empires are hemorrhaging money. Waves of layoffs, private equity firms wrapping their talons around digital outlets' necks and squeezing outright and objective business failures. I don't know why anyone would want to be a journalist right now. I'm including myself here too. I got into my journalism program at a late stage, fully aware of the problems in the industry, and even I'm discouraged. Imagine how my classmates feel. The gig economy, as a result of this bloodbath, has come to pick up some of the slack. In a 2023 report by the Centre for Regulation of the Creative Economy in the UK, they found that the median income of journalists who had at least 50% of their income from freelancing was only £17,500. Other interesting findings from their survey were that LGBTQIA+ journalists comprised more of the freelance market, and black journalists earned 7 times less than white journalists. In an article for The Conversation, study author Amy Thomas addresses some of the factors behind these findings. Low levels of income for freelancers have been attributed to a range of complex factors surrounding new technologies and business models. particularly the move from physical print to digital media distribution. For this reason, regulators around the world are currently considering the extent to which online platforms that host news content, like Google or Facebook, should pay for the use of that content as a potential route to improving newsroom revenues, in theory, trickling down to journalists. One of the undeniable factors that shapes news media in the 21st century is how social media tech platforms have approached journalism. In Canada, where I'm from, a federal bill passed that required Meta, parent company of Facebook and Instagram, and Google to dole out money to Canadian news outlets for sharing links on their platforms. In response, Meta completely pulled access to news. As a result, Canadians are far less informed than they were before the ban. But it's not just Canada. Meta has moved away from news in their comprehensive approach to their media feeds. Since Trump's election, Silicon Valley oligarchs have definitively shifted to the right. Mark Zuckerberg, chief nerd at Meta, bent the knee, abolishing their fact-checking department and removing meager protections for marginalized people. Don't even get me started on X, the everything app. These sites are prioritizing users to stay on their site, rather than be directed anywhere else. So external links are now massively deprioritized in two of the biggest places you would typically go to spread your articles, especially if they're news. So picture this. You're a journalist, recently laid off from a legacy outlet. You're now on your own. What do? At the risk of being glib, you start a Substack, another platform run by people who want to keep both the writers and readers on their platform. They also host Nazis pretty unapologetically.
I mean, I just want to be clear. If somebody shows up on Substack and says all brown people are animals and they shouldn't be allowed in America, you're going to censor that. Do you allow that on Substack? Would you allow that on Substack Notes?
I think the way that we think about this is we want to put the writers and the readers in charge.
No, I really want you to answer that question.
I'm not going to get into gotcha content moderation.
This is not a gotcha. I'm a brown person. Do you think people on Substack should say I should get kicked out of the country?
I'm not going to engage in content moderation, would you or want you, this or that, content moderation questions.
But it's the thing that you have to do.
You're on your own. Not only that, but you're now on your own fighting with AI slop that may even be scraping your own words to paste ads all over their own pages. They're making money off of your work that you aren't even being paid well to do. You are now incentivized to get a big as audience as you can, push as many stories as you can, and make as much money as you can. So what do? You make thumbnails designed to intrigue people on your YouTube. You write headlines designed to pull in clicks. You make connections to bigger personalities in order to appear in established outlets and build your audience. It's the gig economy and neoliberalism come for your news. We're seeing this happen to big companies. BuzzFeed News won awards for its reporting. But because of corporate fuckery, they shut down their Pulitzer Prize-winning newsroom, and now they're going to build a social media platform with AI. Again, I have to qualify this. A lot of very good journalists I know have their own newsletters. At first glance, the option gives them a lot of freedom from the pressures we discussed earlier. No editorial management can direct them to omit an angle from a story. You're not required to push out multiple stories a day. In a very real way, your audience becomes your boss. But if you want to make a living, you have to account for what will boost paying subscribers and what will lose you subscribers. And you know what gets you a lot of attention? Staying on these platforms and doing what they prioritize. Complaining about free speech, saying outrageous things so people will engage with your account, appearing on the big news networks so your clips will go viral, then writing, continuing the trend of outrage with wild headlines and articles. You need to play to these audiences. To be clear, these pressures affect each individual journalist in different ways. After all, the freedom from the grind of a legacy newsroom is very real. But going solo brings precarity. Precarity heightens pressure. Considering how most journalists do not have a material understanding of what pressures were working against them in the legacy industry, it's no wonder that when they do go solo, they often play into those same societal and algorithmic pressures that made their old bosses lay them off in the first place. Incentives push towards a certain kind of reporting. But now, these people also have the credibility to co-opt rebellion. They don't work for these big outlets anymore. They can finally tell you the truth. And that truth is usually whatever preconceived notions they held before that were tempered by these forces. If you don't have a class analysis, it's only natural that these stances trend towards a hyper-focus on individual identity. divisive issues, coverage that reinforces invisible biases. I don't want to be misunderstood. There are great journalists on Substack, Ghost, Beehive, whatever. But societal and economic pressures alongside algorithm-focused social media, which prioritizes engagement above all else, has created a situation where most of the news you read will be incredibly biased towards our current system, in ways that are largely invisible. It's also created a new section of journalists that use the aesthetics of rebellion to shift coverage rightward. Cards on the table here, I'm part of this system too. You're watching this on YouTube, a platform that prioritizes longer content. Videos have to be longer than 8 minutes to qualify for mid-roll ads, which gets people more money. Weekly uploads are typically advised to make the most amount of money, so creators are financially incentivized to make long videos and post them on a weekly basis. Hard to make a high-quality video with those kinds of pressures, unless you're part of a big team. If you're just one person, you're incentivized to chase what gets clicks, choose length over quality, and hope to the universe that you're one of the lucky few that the algorithm picks up. For the record, this channel is not monetized. I'm not taking any sponsors. I'm doing this completely for free. So the least you could do is subscribe, hit the like button, and comment, I guess. Just like I'm incentivized to tell you to do. So you're either a reporter who's overworked at a legacy outlet, pressured to report in a way that doesn't seriously challenge the system, or you're a journalist recently laid off from a stable industry job, or looking to break into the industry yourself with your own newsletter, YouTube, TikTok, or whatever platform you prefer. Either way, modern tech capitalism has incentivized you to report a certain way. Often, when you're rewarded for a particular story, appearance, or approach, you'll keep going down that path. Engagement is prioritized above all else. But even though your reporting may continue to uphold the system, it's a mistake to think it's not doing anything. Think about the sources I've used for this video. They're all things that have been reported by journalists. No matter how flawed, no matter how much they're a result of capitalist pressure, it's information that has been dutifully reported. Now, what if you're someone who stands to gain from less coverage? Like, say, someone looking to achieve power. Far-right politicians across the globe have been attacking news media since time immemorial. Whatever their claimed reasons, the true reason they oppose news media is because it's not something they can control. Mussolini, the founder of fascism, was a journalist and understood how crucial news media was to cultivating public perception. Likewise, Trump and his MAGA crowd despise journalists. Associated Press was barred access to a Trump presser because they didn't change their guidelines to describe the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. In a hilarious example of leopards and faces, look at Substacker journalist Matt Taibbi, who suckered up to Elon Musk to publish the Twitter Files, a series of extremely stilted internal documents designed to make it look like Twitter before Musk was controlled by the Democratic Party. He's now been shunned by Musk. Conversely, Musk, who was initially excited about having Don Lemon host his show on his website, pulled support after Lemon pushed back against him in his first interview. These two men, Musk and Trump, represent an entire demographic in the journalism sphere. Musk, who has been sued repeatedly for violations of every kind, would love to stamp out any critical coverage of him, while Trump, of course, would like the same. One study at Northwestern University by the Local Journalism Initiative found that Trump won in a landslide where there are news deserts. Local news informs people as to what's happening in their immediate surroundings. National news turns the local conditions into abstract talking points by federal politicians. I'm not saying the system before was good, but the state of things right now are far worse, for us at least. So once again, you're a journalist working solo. Are you going to write something to get them to target you? Especially if it's just you doing all the work alone on a platform you don't control, without any team behind to support you, where liability insurance would eat up the few meager dollars that you do make. Make no mistake, it's not as though the big news companies are prepared to face Trump and Musk. CBS News is looking to settle out of court in a suit that Trump launched against them when they interviewed Kamala Harris for 60 Minutes. Paramount, the company that owns CBS, is looking to merge with Skydance Media, a merger that would require approval under the FCC, which the Trump administration now runs. This reinforces my point. Capitalist entities are compromising diverging interests in service of capital. It will be in Trump's hands whether he wants to reward or withhold that expansion of capital, but he's not looking to smash the dynamics. He just wants to control critical coverage of him, a thing that has objectively been done by legacy news, at least in the past. I feel a little bad about picking on The Verge so much early on in this video, so in a show of good faith, I want to show you what Nilay Patel said regarding this situation and the FCC chairman Brendan Carr.
I actually don't care what your politics are. That is First Amendment fire territory, right? You just don't want the government interfering with speech in this way. Do not trade the First Amendment for a merger. It's not going to work anyway, by the way. I'm telling you, there's a lot of bad Trump administration stuff. And you might hate my politics, whatever you think my politics are, but I have been very consistent on this show for over a decade that government speech regulations are bad. Here they are. They have a face. They have a name. It is Brendan Carr. He is trying to pressure news organizations using the idea that the FCC can regulate the airwaves to regulate speech directly as a trial balloon for how can the FCC regulate what's on the internet.
It sounds like a big leap from one to the other, but it's not. It's the same playbook you can run in both places.
Nilay's right. He has been very consistent on the US concept of free speech. He has also, at every opportunity, said that he is a capitalist. He's in favor of the system that got journalism to this point, and in the grander scheme of things, the same system that brought Trump to the White House. Again, Nilay is in no way an outlier here. Ask any honest editor-in-chief at a random outlet if they are a capitalist, and I would be shocked if they said no. Actually, you know what? Do not harass anyone at The Verge or any other outlet I mention in this video. If you do, you will drown in your own pathetic and hateful emotions. I'm raising this now because this displays the contradictions. In one corner, we have an administration empowered by wielding the public's justified distrust in news media to further eradicate reporting that harms their position. On the other, we have an instance of the news media, which is a product of the same system, decrying these attacks. And he's right. Interfering in this way is a violation of the First Amendment of the US Constitution. But just saying that isn't going to stop it. Just reporting on it is not going to stop it. So that raises the question, what's going to stop it? I'm not going to lie to you. We're not going to get out of this pickle anytime soon. And we're definitely not going to consume our way out of this. But I'm going to lay out 3 categories of actions you can take to improve both your perception of journalism as well as the broader state of journalism as a whole. Step 1. Before anything else, identify your values. Why do you consume news? And make sure you really drill down into your reasoning. If you think, I want to be informed, that's not enough. Why do you want to be informed? To what end do you want to learn about what's happening? What are you going to do with that news? Do you believe knowledge is an inherent good? Why? Why not? Do you believe that we should protect those who are marginalized by society? Why? No one can do this for you but you. If you don't have hard boundaries, things that you won't accept, you will accept anything. Little by little, it'll worm its way in until you don't recognize the person you were. Now we get to what actions you can take. Read more than the headlines. I know, life is hard and fast and news can be so boring, but please, most news articles are structured specifically so that the most important information is at the top of the article. Whenever you read a news story that evokes an interest, check another outlet and how they framed the same event. Make sure it's not from a wire service before you do this, or clock when it is. Do this for a week or two until you get a feel of what's left in the story that's omitted from another. Start small with outlets you usually trust. Then, think about what they aren't covering in this story, or what is kicked towards the end, or what's downplayed. If we go back to the OpenAI story, there was no mention of how DeepSeek threatened them or OpenAI's deal with Vox Media. Often in stories about landlords struggling with difficult tenants, we don't hear about how real estate has been commodified. We don't hear about how homelessness has skyrocketed. Sometimes they'll also omit things that they shouldn't. Your values will determine what qualifies as necessary information. As a part of this, you're always going to want to check the news organization itself. Who owns it, what people say about its bias, and what lands with your values. If you think public news media is a fundamental good, you will probably think better of something like the BBC, or CBC, or Australia's ABC. But these outlets will rarely do reporting that questions the fundamental legitimacy of their government. They will, of course, report on bad things their government has done, but there will never be a CBC article that says, unequivocally, since the doctrine of discovery was rescinded, the Canadian government is legally obligated to renegotiate its entire structure from the ground up with Indigenous nations. The point is not to find something that can get them added to your blacklist, but to understand what economic and ideological factors influenced their reporting. It stands to reason that public broadcasting will typically be softer on reporting on the government. But it's just as true that private news organizations will not report in a way that threatens business interests overall. Sometimes someone will share an article by Radio Free Asia or Voice of America as though they're reputable sources. They aren't. And their funding structure shows that they're funded by the US government specifically to target countries like China and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Put aside any preconceived notions you have about these countries, some of which are probably correct. Would you trust an outlet funded by a government to truthfully report on their geopolitical enemies? That's when you look at other reports of the same phenomenon. Do they have different sourcing? Or do they all cite the same Radio Free Asia report? So to that end, have a blacklist, but keep it extremely stringent. I'm talking about outlets like Rebel News, Gray Zone, places that have completely abdicated any shred of accuracy in service of their political aims. You should have a dark gray list that's far more expansive. These are outlets that have been compromised, but due to their size and influence, still break and cover important stories. Truth be told, most of the outlets you consume should be on the gray area, but ones that repeatedly omit valuable perspectives are only worth your time once in a while. After all, they're the ones who got us here in the first place. Here's where you do things outside of just reading. Support and engage with journalists and outlets that you value. If they've got a newsletter, subscribe for free. Open their emails. Read their work. If you can afford it, sign up for a paid membership. If they're on Substack, for example, and you have a problem with that, genuinely engage with them that you would prefer to support them in other ways, or, politely raise concerns about that platform. I'm sure they've addressed it. Don't yell at them for it, for the love of God. If it's a bigger news outlet whose news your taxes pay for, example, or whose coverage you value, you can send a complaint when they do a bad story. If enough people do it, they will be aware of the problem. If they change, that's great. If they don't, well, now you know firsthand, don't you? This one is going to be the hardest. Talk with your neighbors. Join community groups. See how your area feels about the news that represents them. Is there a need that can be filled? If so, how can you and your community join together to fill that need? What do you want to see from news coverage? When a journalist reaches out to someone, here's what you can do. Check the journalist and outlet's history. Ask what topics will be covered. Most journalists will never give you the questions they're going to ask, but you can get an idea of what they want to talk to you about specifically. Ask to see when the piece is finished. If you have any critiques or concerns, bring them up. Keep in mind that unless they agree that something should be off the record, they may publish it. A good journalist will keep in mind the mental state of someone they're interviewing if they aren't in a position of power. For example, Henry Kissinger? Who cares? Someone who witnessed a murder? Probably going to get pretty heavy, and they should be sensitive to that. They should check in on them. It's also possible to have regular news media workshops where you can teach news media criticism, like we've outlined here, in more practical ways. Help cultivate a critical eye so we can expect more from the news that pretends to represent us. If you're in a newsroom, get involved with your union or start one. Demand a say in how much work reporters are expected to do and the editorial direction. To be fair, a lot of these principles have been implemented in Indigenous communities and by Indigenous reporters. Some of the methods are chronicled in Duncan McHugh's book, Decolonizing Journalism. Despite mistrust in the news media running rampant, it's an essential part of our information ecosystem. Most YouTube videos with research, every sketch comedy bit about a current event, a lot of scripted works. They're all built on a foundation of journalism. It's one of the reasons I wanted to get this degree. Original reporting is desperately needed nowadays. And now I'm back on YouTube. It's important to keep in mind that journalism is an acute example of the degradation of modern tech capitalism. But it's by no means the only factor. We're living in a time where gigantic tech oligopolies run all of our online moments. If you're not on a website owned by a far-right billionaire, you're on another platform owned by a far-right billionaire. At best, you're using a device owned by a billion-dollar company that pledges fealty to far-right politicians using a product that does the same. Unless you're specifically seeking it out, most of the content you consume has an explicit or implicit conservative tinge to it. It's exhausting. But news is something that is crucial to a functioning society. Make no mistake, every fascist that decries fake news or the lying media knows it too. Why else would they attack outlets that do critical coverage while they favor personalities and outlets that do favorable coverage? To be clear, cultivating and spreading news criticism is a great thing to do. Starting an outlet to do the same in your local community is amazing. But we aren't going to consume our way out of this. We need to challenge the system that put us here in the first place. That means calling out propagandists, not just the journalists and opinion columnists, but the owners and editors too. That means supporting communities to demand better representation. And most of all, it means publishing articles that aren't just advertisements. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. I'm back on a semi-permanent basis. I will be making videos a lot more frequently. I still plan to make the third part of that one video, but it might be bumped back a bit. I've got some free time now. I've got some time to do some journalism. If you want to support the channel, please like, subscribe, comment, follow me on Blue Sky at ucottscott.com. And if you're here because of the conservatism and punk video, and you made it this far, congratulations. Again, I can't believe I mispronounced John Lydon for 26 minutes.